Top 10 Most Controversial Gimmicks During WWE's Attitude Era.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is SOHEB and you are watching Wrestling Fact.
The Attitude Era saw WWE consistently pushing the envelope, leading to some truly controversial gimmicks. The WWE's Attitude Era elevated wrestling to the center of popular culture in the 90s. Raw in the 90s was as entertaining as it was controversial. Many angles and gimmicks from this era would not see the light of day in today's world of wrestling. From Brian Pillman pulling a gun to Sable's outfits, the Attitude Era featured a ton of risque and over-the-top controversy that kept fans glued to their television sets. This list will examine 10 of the most controversial gimmicks from the era that made the WWE a household name across the globe. Number 10. Meat. It's hard to decide which is more controversial, Shawn Stasiak's gimmick Meat or the faction of women that he joined named PMS. Yeah. Meat was presented as a sex slave to Raw audiences. Meat was presented as someone who was always tired because he was worn out from getting busy with the group. The whole concept was supposed to be comedic, but in retrospect, it all comes off as awkward. The gimmick never took off, which is why it's a forgotten controversial idea that made it to air in the 90s. Number 9. The Godfather. The Godfather would make more sense if his name was the Pimp, because that's what he was. His escorts were called hoes. He smoked weed, and would offer his girls over to his opponents if they'd leave the building. It was played off as most comedic, but was always controversial. The gimmick created so much heat with television executives that Vince was forced to remove the Godfather from television. Number 8. DeGeneration X. Sexual innuendo, blackface, cursing, body shaming, and homophobia were just a few things that DeGeneration X did during their time on television during the Attitude Era. There were few wrestling gimmicks as controversial as DeGeneration X. They were also a few gimmicks as entertaining as the group. The early iteration of DX was the first anti-establishment group even before Steve Austin. They were rude, crude, and great at wrestling. Their controversy had no bounds, but DeGeneration X is also as responsible for the success of the Attitude Era as any other wrestling faction. Number 7. Val Venice. Former adult film star Val Venice was one of the many gimmicks from the Attitude Era that would have never even been pitched as an idea today. He entered the ring wearing a towel, and many of his storylines were purely exploits of his sexuality. In a vignette, the WWE even included Jenna Jameson labeled as one of his co-stars. Although a ton of promo footage exists between the two, most of it never saw the light of day. There was also a storyline where Venice had his member chopped off. Everything Val Venice touched was full of controversy. Number 6. Beaver and Mrs Cleavage. A gimmick as uncomfortable as it was controversial, Beaver and Mrs Cleavage were supposed to be a new take on the idea of a wholesome family like the show Leave It to Beaver presented. Beaver was presented as a man who thought he was a child and Mrs Cleavage babied him. Although that idea is just off-putting, the sexual innuendo made the Cleavages uncomfortable. Beaver would spill milk and Mrs Cleavage would clean it up and console him by holding him very close to his chest. It reeked of incest and was awful. The two broke from the gimmick and became husband and wife, which was still odd. Number 5. Ministry of Darkness. For the most part, anything involving The Undertaker would usually pay off in a great way for the fans. The Ministry of Darkness was the most controversial that Deadman ever got with his gimmick. The entire conceit of the Ministry of Darkness was a dark stable that was pseudo-satanic. They offered sacrifices and even once crucified Stone Cold Steve Austin. They also had the WWE Champion at the center of their stable, meaning they were the main event draw despite their controversy. Number 4. Mr. Ass. Although Billy Gunn has become a major part of television, he had a long Hall of Fame career at the WWE. After the New Age Outlaws broke up, Billy Gunn began adopting the Mr. Ass gimmick. He received the biggest push of his career in 1999 with this gimmick, even winning the King of the Ring tournament. The entire idea was that he loved asses of all sizes, including his own. His main event push that included a feud with The Rock was as controversial as his strange gimmick. Number 3. Goldust. Goldust WWE debut. Goldust became one of the most memorable gimmicks of the Attitude Era. He was strange, odd, and out of place, but was constantly competing with all the top stars at the WWE in the 90s. Dustin Rhodes was always a great wrestler that grounded his strangeness. There were a ton of controversial moments in Goldust's career. He had a moment where he added BDSM garments to his attire. He hit on The Undertaker. He kissed Ahmed Johnson. Goldust was always surrounded by controversy, but Rhodes played the role so well it leans more iconic than it is controversial. Right now he is now in AEW. Number 2. Billy and Chuck. Billy and Chuck were controversial for many reasons. The two were presented as a gay wrestler tag team. It could have been a huge step forward for the company, since both men were not seen through the typical lens of what gay men looked like in the era. The larger part of the controversy was added when the pair laughed their entire romance off as a joke. It was a polarizing gimmick that will never be repeated due to the progress society has made on homosexuality. In fact, Billy Gunn works with the acclaimed at AEW, who feature an out gay wrestler, Anthony Bowens. Number 1. Mr. McMahon. Former WWE CEO Vince McMahon. Few people are as responsible for the success of professional wrestling as Vince McMahon. Few people are also controversial figures at the level of McMahon. After the Montreal Screwjob in 1997, McMahon became far more well-known among audiences, and his feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin helped make him a household name. The controversy surrounding McMahon has included everything from objectifying women to feuding with God. There will likely never be an authority figure who in the WWE is as hated as Vince McMahon. His controversies were mind-boggling, but also extremely entertaining. Thanks for watching. See you guys in my next video.